It's funny how generalizable and valuable my psychology training is. Do you know what I mean? Do you think of it as like you go right into like clinical practice or counseling, which is obviously really good work and important, but I think it might be the most flexible, valuable degree you could get, because it's what you want to go into marketing, you want to go into advertising, you want to go into like anything, like fundamentally is psychological at core. And if you have that understanding of the human mind, human behavior, human motivation, boy, the world's your oyster.
You just heard Todd Rose, CEO of Populace and former professor from Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Garth and guest host Jane Halonen from the University of West Florida interviewed Todd as part of the PsychSessions 2023 East Coast Tour for episode 187 of PsychSessions, Conversations about Teaching and Stuff.
Colleagues, do you want to learn more about how you can easily integrate learning strategies into your Intro Psych course? Then sign up for a demo of the Intro Psych book, Psychology in Your Life, and W.W. Norton will give you a $25 gift card for your time. Here's why you should consider it. You've probably noticed that after 2 years of remote learning, your students need some extra support in learning how to study, especially in Intro Psych. So what if you could incorporate study skills directly into the content you're already covering in your course? Sarah Grisson, author of Psychology in Your Life, has offered us this integration. Here's what she did. First, she analyzed the learning science research to find 6 learning impact strategies that would be most helpful to college students, and then she synthesized them into the IMPACT model. IMPACT stands for improving, monitoring, practicing, attending, connecting, and thinking deeply. There are impact learning pauses throughout the book that offer study tips and just-in-time learning hacks. And Inquisitive, Norton's award-winning adaptive assessment, also includes questions on the impact strategies and incorporates these learning tips into Inquisitive's answer-specific question feedback. You're going to want to try this demo out, and they're going to give you a $25 gift card. So sign up for the demo of Psychology in Your Life by going to siegel.wwnorton.com/psychsessions. That's Siegel, like the bird, SEAGULL.wwnorton.com/psychsessions. The PsychSessions podcast is sponsored by STP. That is the Society for the Teaching of Psychology. That's APA Division 2. You can find them at teachpsych.org. The views or product endorsements expressed do not represent the views, support, or endorsements of STP. PsychSessions is so grateful to have STP as a long-term supporter. PsychSessions is proud to partner with Macmillan Learning. At Macmillan Learning Psychology, content matters, and these days, digital content matters more than ever. Macmillan Learning's Achieve elevates interactive teaching and learning with an extraordinary range of online course content in a powerful yet easy-to-use platform. Interactive ebooks, innovative assessments, engaging videos and activities, helpful instructor resources. Achieve brings it all together and makes it easy for you to find what you need and what you want. See for yourself. Go to macmillanlearning.com/psychsessions for an introductory tour today. Macmillan's Achieve for Psychology, engaging every student, supporting every instructor, setting the new standard for teaching and learning. Hi folks, this is Garth, and I think that is a mic drop teaser, don't you, Jane?
I do. I loved the statement that Todd made because it's almost as though he was reading our minds about how to be able to explain the value of a psychology degree.
Now, Jane Halonen is with me. We did this East Coast tour, and she didn't know Todd Rose's work very well, but I know that after this interview and hearing from him and seeing, doing a little research, I think you're impressed by this guy.
I think impressed it doesn't nearly capture what I think about this person. I think I didn't know him at all, frankly, until you suggested him. And I really found myself in the presence of genius. His ability to figure out how to solve problems in unconventional ways was just extraordinary and very inspiring. And so while I didn't know him before, I have now 3 books on my nightstand that I will be going through because I want to get to know him even better.
His work is fascinating, and that's what drew me to him in the first place. Did you think he stopped smiling the whole time that he was talking to us?
He was so excited to be able to share his backstory, particularly because he overcame some incredible challenges to end up in the position that he is today. And so even if he weren't doing amazing things as a professional, the fact that he had this kind of trajectory, it's so worth listening to. So I'm excited for everybody who's going to be able to meet Todd through this vehicle.
Well, he had to hop out. We could have talked to him for hours. We did get an hour with him, and he was so generous. He said, "Hey, I've got to take this phone call." And it was an important phone call. He told us about it. But he said, "Hey, if you want to stick around, I can do some more." We had to get to the airport, but we could talk to him about, I think he has so much to share with us about his perspective on undergraduate education. And I think you may have had some follow-up with him. We might get a part 2 someday.
I certainly did. I followed up with him, and he indicated that he had fun with us and that he'd be quite willing to have round 2, where we'll solve all the problems of higher education.
All of them. Folks,
all of them.
This is Todd Rose from Populace in Burlington, Massachusetts. Hi, everybody. This is Garth, and we are still in the Boston area. I'm looking at Jane Halonen. We are on an East Coast tour interviewing some really great contributors to psychology. And our trip today has brought us to the Populace offices in Burlington, Massachusetts. And I am sitting across from Todd Rose, who's the CEO and co-founder of Populace. And today, Todd, first of all, thanks for joining us. And secondly, I'm really looking forward to talking to you about Populace and about your story and just about where you see things going in an optimistic and positive way, because I think that's a major piece of what you bring.
Yeah. Well, first, thanks for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Great. Okay. I don't know where to start with you, except that I know I've read your books. I know your backstory. And because of this particular audience, teachers of psychology, but also the students' lives that they touch, I think that it is really interesting to find out a little bit about who you are and where you came from.
Sure.
And so I know you've told this story before, but if you would bear with us.
Sure.
I think hopefully we can offer some questions from our kind of insider undergraduate teaching perspective that would be maybe new for you. But, this is Todd Rose today, but it started pretty differently for you, I would say,
right.
Growing up.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah, no, it's, it is a little crazy when you think back on it. Yeah, look, I mean, I grew up in rural America, and, actually school was not a good fit for me. Like that's probably like an understatement. Like, just to put a finer point on it, it sort of all culminated. As it happens in school, right? You don't do well at time 1, that kind of propagates, and I was someone who was super curious and a little annoying about that, and grew up in an environment where conformity and obedience was really prized. So it just never was going to work, right? But it culminates early my senior year in high school. I say I dropped out, but it was more like they said, you have to leave. I had a 0.9 GPA. And truthfully, at that point, I was just messing around. I was there for the social scene. And so I ended up dropping out. We mutually agreed. And my girlfriend at the time, just shortly thereafter, found out she was pregnant. And so we start life, no high school diploma. Within a couple of years, we had 2 kids. We ended up on welfare, and I had a string of minimum wage jobs, like that just were as bad as you could imagine. I mean, honest work, but not something I would recommend.
Like what?
Well, look,
were you a barista?
No, I wish that would have been amazing. this went everything from I was the person at Einstein's Bagels who had to get up at 4 a.m. to get the bagels going. I was a stock boy. I sold cell phones. But the last job I had before I decided something has to give, I had got my certified nurse assistant certification because it paid a little more. And I ended up, there's no kidding, being a home health aide whose sole job was to give people enemas. And it's honest work. I mean, it has to be done. So I'm not, but boy, that is not that. I feel like the burnout rate on that job is pretty high. So
not only enemas, door to door,
right? It is tough because they don't really want you. I mean, they need it.
No,
they don't want you there.
No,
and I don't really want to be there. But it paid $1 more an hour, so there I was.
That may be the worst job I ever heard of.
What's that moment like going up to a door?
It's you really. There's no kidding. You really have to sort of put yourself in the mindset of their dignity that like these are other human beings and this is not something that they wanted, but it's actually, I mean, it really is a help.
Yeah,
I mean,
they need it.
yeah.
Yeah.
And it's just awful. And so, but if you can try to like stay in that space of like, this is actually really important for them, and you're doing some good. I still don't think that's a job that you're going to do for very long. And so my journey really starts there, which is about as rock bottom because you're just not making enough to pay the bills. Nobody wants to have to take handouts. And I wasn't sure. I didn't know where I was going to head. I just knew that wasn't working.
Yeah. Kind of rock bottom.
Yeah. And a lot of people were super frustrated with me, not surprisingly. And I remember my father-in-law had decided, he said I was lazy. And I can actually, in retrospect, I can kind of see it, meaning I wasn't sticking to like these terrible jobs. And at some point you just got to buckle down. Now I would argue buckling down on something that pays $4.25 an hour probably isn't a good, but I get it. But my dad actually, we were actually hanging out and I had told him that. And he said, I don't think that's really true. He said, I think that you just need to be constantly motivated. And he's like, when you are motivated by something, you're as good as it gets. And when you're not, you're as bad as it gets. Like, and I've never forgot that. And it's so true to this day. Like there's just no middle ground for me.
Right.
And,
what kinds of things had he seen that you had been motivated at in the past?
So anytime I was passionate about something, whether it was sports, and even like, like playing the piano, which I turns out I can play by ear. So I skipped the lesson, which is not a good.
Skip the lesson.
Yeah, you got to take the lessons. Like, but like, so anytime I got interested in anything, hobby wise, stuff that like I would stick with it, I would do really well. But whenever it was, you need to do this, and I don't know why I need to do it, I don't understand the why of it all. I forget it. And so, it stuck with me. He said, look, he felt like there was a path. There were a lot of jobs and things like that he felt like, actually, you could have a good living, a good career, but you can't get there from here. So you've got to make some change. And he knew enough about me, which is, I feel like I'm much more of an entrepreneur. I'm actually be a terrible business person. But the mindset of an entrepreneur, I much prefer to start things than sort of like optimize and run. And he just said, look, you either need to start a business or think about college. Again, since I knew enough about myself to know that I had no business ideas and I had $13 in my bank account. So I was really fortunate because my dad was the first high school graduate in our family and the first college graduate. He was a mechanic, and I still remember, I think it was in 6th grade, and he came home one day. And look, being a mechanic's honest work. It's important. But he just said, hey, I think there's something different for me. And he decided he was going to go to college at night and become a mechanical engineer. No one in any of our families had ever, and in fact, it actually caused some difficulty with his parents, who felt like maybe he was trying to, upstage them a bit. That was, and so I watched his pursuit of his passion and the education that was required to realize that. I watched that change our lives and life circumstances. So it was sort of, even though school had been a terrible experience for me, when you hit rock bottom, you have a model, right, to look to and say, like, it seemed to yield pretty, and I will say my dad just retired, but he went on to an incredible career in the airbag industry, inventing all kinds of things that are in cars to this day that save people's lives. So it's, it's a good lesson that, like, just because your life's not going the way you want it at any given time, there's still second chances.
What do you think about those students out there? I have a friend in my history who was, by all accounts, a failure at school, and was never thought of himself as successful intellectually. And then when it came to getting into university, something clicked for him, and things took off. I just think it's interesting for students who are coming into college having this mindset about themselves that they're not good at this. I know that you study kind of individual differences. What do you think's going on with that?
I think that it's sort of makes sense that, okay, so here we all are. We're all in school, and they're not usually schools of our choosing. And for most of the last 100 years or so, they are standardized systems of education. One size fits all. I mean, I know on the margins they'll do some things, but like, and that is put against incredible human variation. And it's not surprising that in a one size fits all thing, where we know there's actually no such thing as average in reality, that it's just not going to fit for some people, for a lot of people, frankly. And we've mistaken gutting through it with getting the most out of people's potential. But imagine if you're someone like I was, where it really didn't fit. Why in the world would I think it's the institution designed poorly? Like, why wouldn't you just assume you're not terribly smart? Right. And I think the biggest takeaway from my life and my research and my intellectual interest, and this will sound like incredibly optimistic, but I think it's a fact. There's nobody who's not capable of greatness of some kind. And so it's recognizing that it's about finding a good fit between your individuality and the environment you're in that makes all the difference. And I can share some stories in my own journey in undergrad that was the defining moment for me.
Before you go there, how the heck did you talk a school into taking you with a 0.9?
Well, here's the good news. I went to Weber State University in Ogden, Utah, and it was open enrollment. And
that's how.
You think about, we're losing that aspect of that will take everyone, right? Like, and as all the universities and colleges try to become more selective, which I actually think is the dumbest concept on the planet. There's something fundamentally wrong in higher education when we define quality by how few people we educate. That's just wrong, and it has to go away. That's terrible. But even then, they only allowed me to go at night off campus to start, right? Which is,
you had to do an audition.
Yeah. Which, look, fine, right? But and it's interesting because we didn't have much money. My family kind of cobbled together enough for me to have the first year, and it was not expensive, but it was, it's all relative, I guess. And so I was going to school 4 nights a week. You work all day and then you go from like 5 to 8, and then you get home and spend time with your kids or whatever, and then do homework.
We both have students like that at the institutions that we work at.
Yes, we do.
Yeah, it's it really it really focuses the mind in a hurry. But I knew that I either had to make this work or it was back to the life I had. And so the only thing I knew going in, and my dad was very helpful on this, is he said, like, whatever I was doing before didn't work. And so I was going to have to figure out how to make this work for me. And so I really went into it, again, highly motivated to make it work. And so it was funny from day one. I didn't want to fool myself into thinking like that I could do whatever I wanted, but I knew that the sort of traditional recommendations of the system did not work for me. So I get to talk to my advisor. Well, not really an advisor. It was like, there's so many students. It was kind of like your last name starts with R, and like this is,
Sure.
And I got incredibly generic advice about, well, you failed algebra 3 times, which was true. So you should take remedial math, which is like the most taken and failed course in the country, which is a terrible idea to start. If you don't have good study skills, what a terrible place to start. My dad said, look, you need to build study skills. So why don't you pick classes that when you look at it, you're like, oh, this is so interesting to me, because then the passion for it will pull you along, and you can build the study habits that will sustain you over time. And so they said, take remedial math. Oh, and you should probably take like, first year English, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, no, we're not doing that, And so I just went through and it's like, oh, this seems really interesting. And we did that. And then, it was funny. They was like, well, but sign this, we told you, I ended up doing, remember the CLEP test stuff? Mm-hmm. I realized, wait, I'd be better off just to CLEP out. I could study for these things, for the math stuff on my own and CLEP out of that. And then I didn't take first year English till my senior year. So I'm building up these things. And what was nice is along the way, you're really paying attention to when it seems like it's working. And I quickly figured out that there were, even in a pretty standardized environment, there were things, and most people will intuitively get this, like obviously there's certain kind of professors that just worked well for me, mm-hmm. and some that didn't. There were environments that worked and didn't, right? And I would go to classes the first couple of weeks, and if I'm like, this doesn't feel right, it's not worth trying to make that work. So it sort of all culminates, and sorry for this really long story, but for me, there's a moment where I think it really crystallized like what I wanted to focus on the rest of my life. Was I still thought I was doing okay, but it's easy to be like, well, must be an easy class, or that must be, it takes a while to recapture that sense of maybe I'm actually reasonably smart. And I'm sitting in my history class. It's a really big lecture hall. I tried to avoid those, but I just couldn't in that case. I'm sitting next to my buddy, Steve, and the class they did the best they could, but I was like, this is just, this is gonna be tough. And he goes, oh no, this is so much better than what I've gotten myself into in the honors program. And in my mind, I thought the honors program was literally the same classes, but you did more work. Because that is sometimes how it is.
That is the way it is.
Like the specific honors is mm-hmm. that, right? And I didn't realize there was like a general honors program. And he says, yeah, there aren't lectures. There's just like 12 people in a room, and so you kind of can't hide. They know who you are. And he said there aren't even tests. Like you have to just like write stuff. And he's like, I don't even think there are right answers. All we do is debate. And I'm like, wait, what? Like I literally was like, that can't be true. Like that sounded like dinner at the Rose household with like, I was like, wait, we just debate and put our own ideas for. I'm like, yeah, too good to be true. I impulsively grabbed all my stuff at the end of class and raced up the hill to the honors program after I figured out where it was. They had their own floor, second floor of the library, went right in and told the secretary, Marilyn Diamond, who to this day is one of my favorite people in the world. I said that I want to be in the honors program. She said, great. Let me get you. I think we can get you in to talk to the director. Let me see. And they get me in and I sit down, and the guy was so nice. And he said, oh, we're really proud of this. We're proud of this thing we've built. Let's just, okay, we have a couple of questions, and okay, we only had a few classes here so far. Well, okay, so what was your high school GPA? Like, and I this is no kidding. I said 0.9. And his honest to goodness response was, what 0.9? Like I left some important thing off the front end of this. And I said, oh, like 0.9. And then it just kind of all dawns on me, like, oh, and he said, he was so nice about it. He wasn't rude. He just said, I don't think you can be in the honors program. Like, I'd like to believe, I interpret it as we have standards and, we're not letting you in. That's not what he said. But so I was like so embarrassed, and I just hurried and grabbed all my stuff, and I wanted to get out of there and go crawl in a hole, and as I'm leaving, Marilyn Diamond's desk was right next to the door. And as I was walking out in a hurry, she actually reached out and grabbed my arm. And she said, look, I overheard the conversation. If you want this, don't take no for an answer. But I didn't know that was even a thing, like that you could not take no for an answer at this institution. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, just sit on the couch here and don't leave until he lets you in. So I sat there, which for what felt like the whole day, it was probably a few hours, because the director actually taught class. So he left and came back and he said, what are you doing here?
What are you doing here?
And I said, well, I want to be in the honors program. He said, you can't be in the honors program. So finally he comes back and he pokes his head out of his office. He said, come back in here. And he said, okay, look, tell me why you want to be in the honors program, because I don't get it. On paper, it doesn't make any sense.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I started telling him about the things I had learned about myself and why I thought this environment was actually a really good fit. And he said, okay, look, I can't just blanket let you in, but I can let you in on a provisional basis. So he said, here's the deal. Pick a class. And if you do really well, I'll let you take another. And if you do well again, like we'll go from there.
That's a perfect solution.
Yeah. And what I loved is he said, let me be clear. Doing well isn't getting the best grade in the class. Doing well is when I ask that professor, he or she says, I can't imagine the class without him.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a standard.
So contribute, participate, add value like this, which was kind of interesting. And in a weird way, actually, like less, you go into it different, right? Versus these are all competitors. I need to do better than them. I need to be part of this group. And it was just such a great frame. So I actually went through the catalog of what was available at the time, and I'm like, okay, this is the most important choice of my life, right? And I found this class called Plagues of the Modern Era, which was highly motivating. I was this close to being a vegan for I learned a lot. And so it turned out it was unbelievably great fit. It was like such a so flash forward, I not only did I get to stay in the honors program, I ended up graduating as the honors student of the year when I graduated from university with a 3.97 GPA on my way to Harvard for graduate school. And I say that for a couple of reasons, that story, because number one, I really do believe that it's not about putting people on a bell curve and that somehow folks like us can divine who's got talent and who doesn't. It's really about that fit. And if you know enough about your own individuality, you always have choices, and you'll be shocked at the difference it makes if you can get that fit. That's the first thing. The second thing is, I'm proud of my story. I'm proud of what I get to do for a living. I definitely worked really hard. But the sort of Marilyn Diamond aspect of that shouldn't be ignored.
It's huge.
Yeah, there's a relational aspect of this, which is, I have to say, just a couple of years ago, pre-pandemic, I got an award from Weber State, and I was going back, and realized Marilyn was retiring at the same time. I thought, what a great opportunity to tell everybody from the stage, just what a great person she was. So I told some version of the story I just told you, and the dean says, well, Marilyn, why don't you come up and say a few things? And she's kind of quiet, and she gets up and gives me a hug, and she kind of adjusts the microphone, and she said, well, I really appreciate the story, Todd, but I have to admit, I don't remember that. And I thought she was saying, you're lying, right? And I was like, no, but it happened. She was like, no, I believe it did. I just don't remember it. Well, here's the funny thing. It turned out everybody had a Marilyn Diamond story.
Oh, sure.
It's just the way she was.
Yeah.
She didn't remember it because she'd done something like that for so many other people.
Yeah.
And it really dawned on me. It's like, it's so easy to forget that we all can be Marilyn Diamond for other people. And like, it can be life-changing on our side, on the side of the person receiving it, and literally so inconsequential that you don't even remember it, right? We tend to think like there's this linear, like, to have some profound impact on somebody's life, it's just going to require such a heavy lift. I don't think that's true. And so I think as we think about the world we want to live in going forward, the kind of country we want to live in, if we really believe that everybody's got something to contribute, it's not always just going to be institutional and individual. There's just going to be a relational and community aspect to this, and we all have a role.
I love the hero quality of Marilyn in that story, but I have to say I also admire your audacity to be able to sit there and just hang in and then ultimately be persuasive that this was something that you were not going to let go.
Yeah. And again, she gave me a permission to do that. Mm-hmm. And here we are.
And there was a desperation, right?
Yes.
You had young kids.
Okay, there is that too.
The desperation is incredibly motivating.
Yeah. So Harvard, did you choose Harvard and other places?
Yeah. So this will probably sound like a textbook undergrad. So I never thought of grad school. That just wasn't even it just wasn't something we thought of, right? Let alone Harvard. I literally had no idea where Harvard was. And I had some incredible mentors, Dr. Bill McVaugh, who's since passed, Dr. Eric Amsel, both at Weber State. And
we know Eric well.
Yeah, he's amazing.
He is amazing.
Yeah, amazing. And actually, he's the reason he knew my mentor at Harvard, Kurt Fisher. They were on the Jean Piaget Society executive committee together. So his letter went a really long way to overcome like Weber State. What is this kind of thing? And Eric and Bill pulled me aside one time and said, look, I actually think, I remember the exact wording because I always thought it was strange, but he said, we think you have the great PhD timber, like the stuff of the, and I was like, the fact that I didn't know what that meant probably questioned whether that was true, right? I don't really think about that, but and they convinced me that if it was something that I wanted to pursue, I would have to actually start doing some research, and that would mean I would have to stop working full time. But so we were barely getting by, and kind of running the numbers. We were looking for opportunities at the university, like work study, other things. And thought, well, look, if we could find this kind of thing on campus, I could cut back to half time. I could do research. And so lo and behold, magically, this posting appears and in the psych department. And the head of the psych department says, Julie Arbuckle says, hey, literally reached out and said, I think this would be perfect for you. I'm like, that's weird. And I was like, what is it? It's like almost to a T, the exact amount of money that I needed to offset in this. And my job would be, it was like perfect. I would be doing stuff that I needed. And I was like, this is unbelievable. I'm thinking this is like divine intervention.
Yeah.
So I did that, and it gave me the chance to start doing research with Eric and Bill. And it wasn't until probably a decade later that I found out that Bill McVaugh, who was my advisor, went to the department and offered to teach a 5th course and gave the money back so they could hire me.
Wow.
But he didn't want me to know. That's like, that's so ridiculous, right? Honestly, like who does that?
Yeah.
But without that, I couldn't have started doing research. And that research we did together, I got to go to Stockholm, to present it with Bill, and it was quality enough that it mattered when it came time to applying to graduate school. And I didn't know, where I applied to 13 schools. Like I literally tried to follow the like, what's your safety schools? I have no idea. Like, and I was so excited. I wanted to work with Kurt Fisher, and I had read this book, Human Behavior in the Developing Brain. I still have the copy. It was, those sterile academic press books. It has a white cover, black text, nothing fancy. Yeah. But I had, it was expensive as academic books are. So that's what I asked for Christmas. And, I got it, and it was life-changing because here was the first glimpse I got of an alternative explanation for my own experiences, which was like, wait, essentially we're doing it wrong in research, that you simply can't use aggregate data to model individuals. I just like, and a lot of it was over my head, and it's complex systems and so this, but I knew intuitively that this felt right and I wanted to be a part of it. Well, on the book cover, it said he was at the University of Denver. So I'm like, that's like 8 hours from here. This is perfect, right? So I got in my head, I'm like, I want to work with Kurt Fisher. And then it turned out Eric Amsel knew Kurt Fisher. I'm like, this is just perfect. And then I found out he had since moved on to Harvard. And I was like, wow, that's too bad. like really, that's just too bad.
Wherever Harvard is.
Yeah. And like, I don't even know where it is, and I'm quite certain I'm not getting in. Yeah. So I was, I did apply. I did the, dream schools, the sort of middle, I think I'm competitive, safety schools. And then, luckily I did get into Harvard. And it's, the rest is history, but it was just, I didn't know what I was doing. Right. Like, all kinds of stories about, after the fact now learning from Kurt and Howard Gardner, like how close it was to me not getting in. Oh. and Kurt advocating for me, cause Kurt had a blue collar background. Mm-hmm. And so he saw through the, where you only know what you know, right? And so it's easy to look and say, well, what school did you go to? Blah, blah, blah. What was your jury? But Kurt was able to see something. And he was actually on sabbatical. And he still reached out and said, look, I want this kid. And he and Howard kind of debated. And look, Howard has been a wonderful mentor to me too. And I understand why on paper it's like, well, why would we take this kid from Weber State didn't even have a master's degree, which is pretty normal now that you'd get master's first, mm-hmm. and sort of like not take somebody else that more prestigious school. So, pretty lucky to have the sort of mentors in my life that I've had.
So you move your family to this area, and what's it like to be at Harvard?
Well, first of all, it might as well have been in a different country. Yeah. We packed up everything we had into we had a minivan and a U-Haul trailer. And first of all, I'm for having a father who's a mechanical engineer, my son is a mechanical engineer. I do not have whatever gene I front loaded the tiny trailer, so we couldn't go above 48 miles an hour or it would fishtail. So we're just like putting across the country. And, this is just how ridiculous I didn't have any credit cards because that was part of what I learned about myself. I would spend and I'm like, how did I rack up all the, so I thought, well, why not just not have them? Right. And so we're driving around, I had an envelope with cash. And we'd kind of run the numbers. We were sleeping in like Walmart parking lots on the drive back. I'm like, we'll be able to get to Cambridge.
How old were your kids at this time?
5 and 3. Oh. And so we convinced them. We said, look, we could stay in any of these beautiful hotels, or if you want to sleep in the car, we will take half that money and you can split it. And so they took the cash, obviously, right? Like we were hoping that was how it was going to go. And so it was all a good plan until we hit Chicago. And this thing called toll roads.
Right.
I'd never, the idea that you had to pay to drive on a road, I did not think that was a thing. So we're doling it out and we start realizing we're going to run out of gas before we get to Cambridge. And so this is no kidding, out of desperation, pull up is like by upstate New York. And I just asked the toll because this is back when they had told people still, right? And you'd throw the coins in or whatever. I said, like, do you take checks? And he's like, nobody has ever asked me that. I don't know why not. And so I started writing dollar checks. Now I had no money. We had no money in the bank account. So they all bounced.
Yeah.
And so by the time I get my student loan money in, I have like $35 toll charged essentially all over the East Coast. But you get there and it is just a different world. I mean, wonderful people, but I just didn't fit in. And my, a few days after we arrived, someone ran a red light, totaled our car. My youngest son broke his femur in half. He was at Children's Hospital. We don't know anybody. Now we don't have a car. And like going to orientation, we didn't have enough money to go get a haircut. And so, no, luckily my hair is pretty like, and so I ended up trying to cut my hair myself. And you know that where you're like, clip. No, that didn't work. Okay, just go a little shorter. I ended up having just to shave it. And so I show up at orientation with a shaved head. You know, and I don't even have like the suntan to go with that, right? It's like, and like everyone's introducing themselves and it was okay. There's like 8 of us. And it's like, yes. And I would, you know, I was at Oxford and then I took like a couple of years to find myself in Europe. And the only thing I could think to say when I was like, hi, I'm Todd Rose. This is not my normal haircut. So it was, I mean, wonderful people, but it took a while to acclimate, right?
Tell me people laughed when you said that.
You know, I think they did.
Okay.
But I think everyone was in retrospect, everybody was nervous.
Yeah.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think everyone was a little like fronting a bit. Like, you know, but it was, so it was a bumpy start.
Wow. So you go through at Harvard and then you join the faculty at Harvard.
Yeah. That's a surprise, right? It was funny because even at Harvard, I learned the hard way about, I thought that I was a good writer. Turned out at that time, I was a good writer for Weber State. I think that's fair. And I don't mean that bad or good. It just is. And I took a class. After all this was going not so well, my first class, it's 8 a.m, cognition and symbolic development. And it's all, you know, writing stuff. I'm like, that's okay. I don't feel like I belong yet. You know, I didn't go to Europe to find myself. But I know I'm good at this. And I won't name the professor because it would be a very famous person who's kind of tough.
But you'll tell us when we stop recording.
Absolutely.
Okay,
absolutely. So my son's in a full body cast, right? I'm feeling like a little bit of an imposter. I turn in the paper and I get it back and I got a C-, which actually in grad school there is spelling. Like that's
correct.
That's it. And not only did I get a C-, this professor went out of their way to let me know how they felt about it. And it's no kidding. Something to the effect of, judging by your writing here, I do not believe you have, judging by your work product here, I don't believe you have the writing ability to succeed in graduate school.
Wow.
I left school, cried, just walked all the way home. I wanted to just pack up and go back. Like I realized this was all ego. Like I thought I just dragged my family out here like for my own ego and I shouldn't have. And, luckily I, regrouped a little bit. And, when you look at the feedback, because it wasn't just the mean words, like they did actually like give some feedback. I could see the point that, the prose was there, the logic and the like there was something that was not incorrect about the feedback, and it's super humbling.
But still so incredibly dismissive. Yeah.
I felt like that part wasn't necessary.
Absolutely.
But when you know the person, I don't even think it was mean spirit. It's just the way they are. So I had a choice. Like we had a writing lab at the grad school, but those were my peers. That's just, I didn't want to. So I went to Lamont Library in the undergrad in the quad, and I saw that there was like writing support. So I go there and this young woman who was in her second year but looked like she was 13. You know what I mean? I would never have picked her out as even a student, is doing writing support. And I waited till the end and I went up and I said, hey, you know, can I join this thing? And she said, it's only for undergrads. And I said, no, shoot, right? Like I said, well, this is my situation and I don't feel comfortable. And she said, I'll tell you what, come back on Tuesdays at whatever time it was when she was done. She was like, and I'll help you. And again, not getting paid for it. And so I went back and this young woman taught me enough about what it means to write at that level. And I ended up getting an A in that same class. And so anyway, you build up this, you know, course by course. And so it culminates. I graduate. Now, here's the funny thing. We were surviving on max student loans, right? Max student loans, every penny. But because of the car wreck, we had to pay out on the surgery. So we were actually behind the 8 ball the whole time and I learned a little loophole, which was the student loan office was at the graduate school, but the bursar's office was at the university. And those systems took a while to talk to each other. So I needed the student loans each semester to get released, but we had a term bill that you could float. And I lived in Harvard housing, so you could float the thing. So I would go to the bursar's office, write a check for it, which had no chance of going through, you know, for like $14,000 or whatever it was. And then say, oh, by the way, could you please write a note saying that I've paid off my term bill? And then I would run as fast as I could over to the financial aid office in the grad school and say, I paid this off. Can you please release my student loans? and the checks would like bounce once in the interim, but like it would go through. So I when I was graduating, bless their hearts, they let me walk. But they didn't embarrass me. Everybody gets the diplomas, right? And they're in the binder. I get the thing that looks like it has a diploma in it. Yeah. And I open up and it says basically, you owe us like $30,000. You can have your diploma. It's like hostage, right? Until when you pay. So it took me 3 more years to actually be able to collect my diploma. But yeah, I went and did a postdoc at the Harvard Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics, and which was awesome. I learned so much about what it means to be a scientist there. It was incredible. And then came back on faculty and taught what I believe is one of the first educational neuroscience courses in the country. It was so much fun. And then what was really great is when Kurt retired, he had founded this mind-brain education program that I'd wanted to be a part of. The dean asked me to lead that program, which felt so just wonderful. And just that it was Kurt's program, and you know, it was wonderful. And so I served as the director of that program for a number of years before I decided to make another change.
Yeah. So I'm going to guess that your other change is leaving the faculty at Harvard. And so I think this next, you know, I know that we have a hard out here in 20 minutes or so. But we're going to have to catch up on the rest of your life in that time, because I have a lot of questions for you. Like, what was that decision like to leave there?
That was something I never thought I would do. Mm-hmm. Love the people. It's a great environment. But if you come back to basic principle of like fit, and, you know, there's things that I care a lot about and the kind of world that I want to live in, for which I believe a lot of the insights that have been developed in this broader field around human individuality, human potential, have practical consequences. And ideas take a long time to get out of the academy. And I felt like a lot of the most interesting problems were actually happening in the real world. And I think academia is really good at reflection, and it should be. I think if there's any criticism I'd have is it's sometimes not so good at action. And maybe that's by design, and not necessarily a bad thing. I mean, we do need ideas and the space and time to reflect. I also felt like the things I was, as I was saying, most interested in were these kind of complex problems of real world consequence. And, you know, at Harvard, and probably like most places, tenure is you could probably change the world and it wouldn't matter. It's single author or first author, peer reviewed, or, totally fine. But I knew enough to know that I'm not going to try to change the whole incentive structure of one of the oldest universities. Like, just not going to happen.
That might not work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, I had written my first book, End of Average, and it was surprisingly, like, it became a bestseller. I say that, like, I did not expect that, right? And attracted a lot of people that I also didn't expect. Folks like Mark Zuckerberg and Richard Branson, some of these people who were like, hey, these are interesting ideas. What do you want to do? And I, with my colleague, Prish Rouhani, who was also at Harvard, and we were like, well, what if we spun our lab out of Harvard and did this? And we had some amazing supporters who were like, yeah, you could do this. And so then the question is, like, do you stay with the comfort? And by the way, I will say it one of the things that was not great is how amazing being a Harvard professor is for your identity. You start to coast on that. Like, it doesn't matter where you go in the world. It's not even right. Like, having been like Eric Amsel is as smart as they come. Right. So it doesn't matter. Like I didn't meet very many people would match his intellect at Harvard, but it doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. It didn't matter where I went in the world. People were like, you must be the smartest person, right? And it's seductive and also kind of stagnating. Yeah, you don't really have to do much. I know maybe that's just me, and I'm revealing way too much. But I just felt like if I really believed in the ideas that I was preaching, then I needed to. There was another step, and I needed to create an environment on my own that would enable me to do the things I care the most about. Yeah. And I will say it's been spectacular. Like, I wouldn't change that for the world. It's just been awesome.
It seems like you can pretty consistently find yourself in a place where you're having to take big risk. And did Populace feel like that starting this group?
Yeah, because, first of all, again, reputationally, everybody's like, wow, this, but also just financially, it's like, what if you can't raise money? It's really funny. I think from the outside, these things look risky. And I actually wrote about this in Dark Horse so it's like, it's not, on average, it's a really risky choice. So what I tell people, just go ahead and leave the academy and start your own thing. On average, it's probably not going to work. I mean, but knowing my skill set, knowing what, the things I'm good at, the things I'm passionate about, it didn't feel that risky. Yeah. That and at the end of the day, like, I'm reasonably good at communicating ideas. I have too many ideas, and I'm reasonably good at raising money. Like, I feel like if you could do those things, like this, but I also just believe that for myself, I learned the lesson of, if you're not going to bet on yourself, like, I'm not going to wait around for somebody else to drag me over the finish line. And I always thought about, like, look, is this a good fit for who I am? Yes. Can I live with the worst case scenario? And that, if you can live with the worst case scenario, then it's really not that risky. You know what I mean? And so I thought about what my fallback plan would be. I knew I could always teach. I knew I could, you know what I mean? So it wouldn't have been like existential to my family. It would have been wildly inconvenient and probably a big setback to my career if I had to slink back to, but it wouldn't have been the end of the world. And I think that's a good way to think about life choices. Choose the thing that is, in your mind, optimizes on your passions, your capabilities, but you got to ask yourself that second question. If this goes south, can you live with the worst case scenario? Yeah. If you can, it's just not risky. If you can't, don't make that choice.
Right. So your books, The End of Average was first, right? Mm-hmm. And you can see that book throughout your story, right? Why you wrote that book. It was almost based on experiences you had, and then really kind of sharing the science of what your experience was. And then Dark Horse is a reflection too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's funny. I guess we do write what we know, but the Dark Horse came about because End of Average was successful. My dean said, wow, like, okay, what else do you want to do? I can give you a little bit of money, and he was great. And I was like, well, I'm not going to say no to that.
No.
And when I was interviewing for End of Average, I was interviewing companies that I thought had done a pretty darn good job dealing with individuality in a way that was both good for the individual and also really great for the company. And I met these incredible people that had these quirky backgrounds, but it really wasn't part of the book. So I just kind of left it aside. But it really, okay, I get how say Costco helped this person go from the secretary in the tire department to literally the head of wine for like some absurd thing. But how did she get there? Like, I didn't know that. Like, how did, like, and so, I thought, well, somebody's done that research. And so I kept digging, like, I couldn't find anything. And so, well, when the dean offered me a little bit of money, I said, well, maybe I want to do this Dark Horse project. I had done quant research. I'd never done qualitative. It turns out you can learn a lot by listening to people. Who knew? And it was so fascinating. And it was at first just kind of a fun, like, I'm just going to do this. We just want to, me and my buddy, we're just going to learn. I had hypotheses about what made these Dark Horses so successful that were like spectacularly wrong, like across the board. Like, I thought it would be some personality thing. Like, I thought of like a Richard Branson who he loves bucking the system. Because why would you go your own path instead of this sort of, here's the one that's made for everybody? I felt like you'd have to have something that just wasn't true. And what we found really early on was that they had this different view of success and they were so dedicated to this. And it seems simple, but it was like, they don't care what you think. There's this North Star for them about their own view of a good life. And that is going to guide every choice. And we're like, okay, well, wait, but is that just like retrospectively, like giving an answer that really, so we changed the structure of the question, started digging into like this idea of fulfillment, and like, I didn't want that to be true. Is it squishy?
Yeah.
What do I do with fulfillment? Yeah. But it turned out that these patterns emerge where you see these 4 big things that just keep showing up that they knew that made the pursuit of fulfillment a very reliable path to a successful life. And so then I just was like, well, this feels like something everybody should know. And so in retrospect, I might definitely see myself in the sort of like bottomed out and then come back. And I thought that's how all the Dark Horses would be. But it was actually split pretty close to 50-50 between people like that. So like I was, and then people who were wildly successful by society's standards and wake up one day and they're like, but I'm not happy. And then they make these pivots into things that just seem completely unrelated and then crush it there and are happy. And I'm like, well, that's weird. And so like, it was kind of a fun mix like that. But yeah, that was a lot of fun. And it was very different. I mean, thematically, I think they're very similar. I see Dark Horse as, okay, if individuality matters as much as End of Average is saying it does, what does that get put to use for? Mm-hmm. And realizing that you could harness that in service of a deeply fulfilling life, I think is kind of cool.
Yeah, those stories in Dark Horse are so inspiring. So folks should pick that up if they just want a great read. And then Collective Illusions, it's a bit different than these ones. So what has led you to that book? And I think that book more reflects maybe what you're doing here with the workforce index.
Yeah, all this. Yeah. So it's really funny. So and I'm a big fan of, if I could give listeners any advice, like my goal in life is to never have anyone, my kids have a hard time saying what I do. They usually just tell like their friends, like, just look at the Wikipedia pages. And like, and I think you should be known for the problems you care about. Like, not a title, not a position, just like, what do you care about? And I'm obsessed about something pretty wonky, which is this idea of zero sum versus positive sum. That, like, with my background in complex systems, you realize systems can sometimes, they can be zero sum. For one person to succeed, someone else has to lose, but they don't have to be. And it's crystal clear that our economic systems are positive sum. They can generate abundance. I believe the frontier for society is recognizing that you can have psychological abundance too. That like somebody doesn't have to be unhappy. I know it seems obvious. Like you can thrive, I can thrive. That we're not in competition for those things. And in fact, you actually realizing your full potential and being fulfilled has social spillover in a way that actually does make it better for me if we structure our institutions right. Just like on the economic side, that's the central insight of Adam Smith, Wealth of Nations, is that if we did division of labor and we do some of these other things, we could create material abundance. And you get that hockey stick of GDP improvement that we all get to take for granted now. I believe we can do the same thing with flourishing, but it's going to require some changes in our institutions, just like economic stuff had to change, in our culture and the norms that emerge and in the mindset of individuals. And so that's what I'm obsessed about, is creating those conditions for both economic and psychological abundance. And so our theory of the case, I'll short circuit that for a minute and just say, like, it all depends on us having an accurate understanding of what the American people believe, prioritize, care about, aspire to. And around 2016, we were doing this research, and obviously people were caught off guard by how the election turned out and what polls were saying, and we realized that if we were going to get that accurate understanding, you were going to have to find a different way. So we went back. Luckily, we're not pollsters; we're researchers, and we went back into the academic literature. And there's all kinds of methodologies that exist to get around distortions from things like social pressure. They're just time-consuming and expensive, and not widely understood in the polling industry. That's a them problem, not a me problem, right? So we pulled those together and built an approach to private opinion research that we're probably the most known for now, but it's not what we want to do. It's just nobody's doing it, so we have to do it. I say that's a long wind up to the collective illusions thing, because one of the things we always ask in all the research we do is we'll use these methods that will get at your private views, but we always ask what you think, a second question on everything, which is, what do you think most people would say? Because look, if you have even like a little background in psychology, like I'm all about the individual, not as selfishness, but as distinctiveness, but we are hardwired social creatures. So to pretend that doesn't have some effect would be silly. And so, what we were tracking is we kept seeing this show up in a way that was just pretty astounding. Like right now in America, I'm sure we have more private opinion data on the American public than I can't imagine anybody else has more, just because I don't think anyone's doing it. It's a little bit of a cheat there. But like what we see without fail is about whatever you care about, whatever matters to us, it's a coin toss whether you are right about what you think the majority in this country thinks. And this has profound implications, right? Because conformity isn't all bad, right? Without our bias to conformity, we wouldn't have culture. Social learning is a good thing. Mm-hmm. It can be, right? No need to learn everything the hard way. So the problem is, we understand groupthink can be bad, but what if you're just wrong about what the group thinks? So now your conformity is to a phantom, and your act of conformity creates a self-fulfilling prophecy in which the entire group gets misled into behaving in ways that almost nobody wanted. So that's what's going on in America. I mean, I think that is the defining feature of American society right now. And now that idea of collective illusions, like that's been called by a whole bunch of different names for the last 100 years. Those names are terrible. Like pluralistic ignorance. It's not pluralism, nor is it ignorance. Yeah. You're not ignorant of the group. You think you know, and you're wrong, right? So I felt like we've got a branding problem if you want the general public to have some understanding of this phenomenon. So some of the earliest work on that, they had called it a collective illusion. I thought, that sounds a lot better. Mm-hmm. So I'm just going to like give them credit, but we're going to call it that. And we felt like if you were going to solve some of this, what I would call false polarization in society, most people feel like, oh no, of course we are so divided on everything. I say, it's just really not true. I mean, there are some things like immigration and so that we are. Most stuff, it's a collective illusion, but it doesn't matter, right? Because the consequences are real. But I felt like you can't just tell people that, oh no, we're not as divided, because I'm like, well, my brain is certainly telling me we are. Like, so you've got to help people understand that they can't trust their brain to read the majority anymore, because your brain uses that shortcut of like the loudest voices repeated the most are the majority.
Yeah.
And that's just not in social media age. It's so easy to distort your perception of group consensus. And so I felt like as a starting point, we do a lot of work trying to shatter illusions in culture with some fun stuff. But at the end of the day, only 3% of the public even knew about this phenomenon when we started. So I'd like, if you don't even know that it's possible that you're wrong about the group, like how likely we're going to solve this. So I wrote that book to try to like make a little contribution in that space.
Now, I know that book's got some coverage. I think politics are a major problem or player in this collective illusion game right now. Is anybody reaching out to you to say, hey, if this is true, we want to use this new okay,
so
ahead.
I am and I'll try to be careful because I also want to give them cover. I will say it has been shocking the amount. I don't like politics, but I do like the country. And so like, unless you're trying to tear it down, I'm happy to engage. It's been incredible, the political reception all the way to the White House and leaders on the Republican side, and spend a lot of time doing private briefings about our public data. I'm like, it's all there, but helping them understand, because it turns out that the two demographic groups that are the most susceptible to illusions are politicians, because you just want to get reelected. So you are wildly sensitive to your constituency, but that means you are going to be sensitive to the vocal fringes and more sensitive to perceiving that as majority. The second are CEOs. If you're a CEO, like she could be obsessed about what her customers want and what her employees want. So you're just going to be more sensitive to these things. And so, it's been interesting showing the political stuff, which is always tricky, but like just to put a fine point on it, we had private opinion data showing, on the left, roughly 60% of Democrats publicly said they were in favor of defunding the police. It was 9% in private. But they thought most Democrats. So we actually use that with the White House, say, this is just not true, right? And helping them position things, it was, I don't want to say too much, but it was really kind of fun to be able to be in that space and just saying, look, I'm not trying to tell you what to say. I'm just trying to say, here's the reality of where the American public is. On the right, the most sensitive thing was the stolen election. Majority of Republicans say publicly it was stolen. It's like 14% in private. But there's a right answer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
If your tribe is saying, you think your tribe believes this, what's the value of going against that, right? So it's just, I feel like so much of our politics are rooted in these illusions. And there's people who benefit from those illusions, but they're the people who don't really have the will of the people behind them. And so I feel like if we can get past this problem, we can get on to the hard work of building a more perfect union. But if we don't recognize the nature of the problem, we're in really big trouble.
Well, I'm glad that that people are listening to what you all are doing, because I really do think it could be healing for this country if people do have those collective illusions, the curtain pulled back on them a little bit. We've taken a bunch of your time, but I do want to ask you, what are you writing right now? or if people want to just follow your work and where that's taking you or how you're thinking these days, what's the next thing that they could expect?
So we have a few things coming that I'm really excited about. We've got this big body of work coming in August about how the American public thinks about the American dream. I think it's a really important concept. The public discourse makes it all about economic mobility. I think it's a silly end goal. It certainly matters, but it's not the American dream. And it turns out that's not how the American public thinks about it. It's about having a chance to define your own view of a successful life. And do you believe you have a shot at achieving it? So we're going to give an alternative view of this with some hard facts about where we're succeeding and where we're failing as a country and what we would do if we want to make that concept real for people. And we've built something that will come out next year called the Social Pressure Index, because we've got to get rid of this idea that you can't be honest about your views with each other is so corrosive to free society. But we don't have a measure of, people know privately when they feel like something's not right, but they don't know that everybody else is feeling it. So we've developed a measure that we feel can reliably index the perception of how much social pressure is in culture at any given time and where is it coming from. And so it's got a percentage to it, but then I've color coded it like the terrorist threat level. And so just every year you come out and say, how did this go code orange? Like, what topics are we feeling like we can't have conversation? And then we punch down with this truth serum methodology to reveal the private views where we're just flat out lying about our views. And then we've made partnerships with the biggest Jeffersonian dinner organizations in the country. And so the places where we don't think we can have conversations will become the topics of the dinner conversations all over the country.
Wow.
I'm pretty excited about that.
Well, Todd, thank you for your time today. Thank you for your research. I think that your story is going to inspire. It's inspiring to us, but I think it also is going to inspire a generation of students who don't maybe see themselves as scholars. And so I appreciate that you're a dark horse and that you have shown that that's a good way for students to kind of get into this world and do good in the world. So
yeah, and I will say just in closing, it's funny how generalizable and valuable my psychology training is. Do you know what I mean?
Oh, thank you for saying that.
But you think
That's
of it as
really
like
good.
you go right into like clinical practice or counseling, which is obviously really good work and important. But I think it might be the most flexible, valuable degree you could get, because it's what you want to go into marketing, you want to go into advertising, you want to go into like anything, like fundamentally is psychological at core. And if you have that understanding of the human mind, human behavior, human motivation, boy, the world's your oyster. So I'm very grateful for that background. It's served me well.
And that is a great sound clip for our audience. So thank you so much again. We appreciate your time.
Thank you.